The rise of the medieval merchant class, an economic, social, and political transformation. The medieval period, spanning from the 5th to the 15th century, was characterized by dynamic changes that reshaped the social, economic, and political fabric of Europe. Among these changes, the rise of the merchant class stands out as a crucial development that significantly impacted the course of European history. This emergence was neither sudden nor isolated. It was the result of a confluence of factors that included agricultural advancements, demographic growth, political stabilization, and expanding trade networks. By the 11th century, Europe began to experience an economic revival, with the merchant class playing a central role. Merchants were more than just traders, they were key players in the transformation of a stagnant, feudal economy into a more dynamic, market-oriented one. Their influence extended beyond economics, permeating the political, social, and cultural spheres of medieval life. The growth of this class was both a symptom and a cause of wider European transformations. The fragmentation of political power following the fall of the Carolingian Empire, combined with a growing population and agricultural surplus, created conditions ripe for commerce. As European society began to recover from centuries of invasion and instability, merchants capitalized on these opportunities, establishing trade routes that stretched across the continent and beyond. The rise of the merchant class facilitated the growth of urban centers, challenged traditional social hierarchies, and set in motion economic practices that laid the foundation for the modern world. At the same time, the decline of serfdom and the gradual erosion of the manorial system opened new avenues for economic engagement and mobility, fostering a climate where commerce could thrive. Let's explore the rise of the medieval merchant class from its origins to its consolidation of power, examining the economic, social, and political changes it engendered across Europe. By drawing upon primary sources such as charters, guild records, and personal accounts of merchants, along with secondary scholarly analyses, we will demonstrate how this new social class emerged and grew in prominence, reshaping medieval society in profound ways. The origins of the medieval merchant class. The roots of the medieval merchant class can be traced back to the 11th century, a period marked by several critical developments that created a fertile ground for trade. One of the most fundamental factors was the agricultural revolution that occurred in Europe during this time. Innovations such as the three-field system, which allowed for a more effective rotation of crops, and the heavy plough, which enabled the cultivation of the rich but dense soils of northern Europe, significantly increased agricultural productivity. These advancements led to the production of surplus goods, which were crucial for trade since they freed local communities from the constraints of subsistence farming. The surplus allowed peasants and landlords alike to participate in market exchanges, selling excess produce for profit or for goods they could not produce themselves. The growth of local markets and regional trade fairs became a natural extension of this agricultural surplus. The Champagne fairs in France, for example, became central nodes of trade, attracting merchants from diverse regions such as Italy, Flanders, and England. These fairs, held several times a year, were more than just places for buying and selling goods. They were social and economic hubs where merchants could forge alliances, negotiate trade deals, and develop standardized weights, measures, and currencies to facilitate more consistent trade practices. Merchants at these fairs dealt in a wide range of goods, from wool and cloth to spices and luxury items like silks and gems, catering to both local markets and the growing demand for exotic goods across Europe. Monasteries also played a significant role in the rise of the merchant class. As large landowners and producers, many monastic communities generated substantial surplus goods that could be traded for other necessities or luxuries. The Cistercians, for example, were particularly known for their involvement in the wool trade, which linked them to the burgeoning markets of Flanders and Italy. Monasteries often acted as early banking institutions, storing wealth, lending money, and even investing in commercial ventures. The Church, while initially skeptical of commerce due to theological concerns over usury and the morality of profit, gradually adapted its stance. Canon law evolved to accommodate the realities of trade, promoting concepts such as the just price and permitting limited forms of interest, which helped to legitimize and regulate commercial activity within a Christian framework. Additionally, the legal reforms initiated by various monarchs began to support merchant activities. For example, the English common law developed during the 12th century began to provide more robust protections for property and contracts, which were vital for the growth of commerce. In Italy, the city-states developed their own codes of commercial law that facilitated the growth of trade by providing a legal framework that could be relied upon by merchants. Political factors were also crucial in fostering an environment conducive to trade. The cessation of large-scale invasions by Vikings, Magyars, and Saracens by the end of the 10th century brought a degree of stability to Europe that had been lacking for centuries. Local lords and monarchs began to recognize the potential economic benefits of trade as a source of revenue through taxes and tolls. As a result, they provided protection to merchants and ensured the safety of key trade routes. The relative peace allowed for the re-establishment and expansion of trade routes that had been too dangerous to use during the earlier centuries of instability. This political environment enabled merchants to move goods across different regions, exploiting the opportunities presented by the diverse patchwork of feudal jurisdictions. The growth of urban centers was both a cause and effect of these trade dynamics. Many towns and cities grew around strategic locations, such as river crossings, crossroads, and coastal ports, which were ideal for trade. Cities like Venice, Bruges, and Lübeck became key hubs in emerging trade networks, providing the necessary infrastructure for commerce, including marketplaces, ports, warehouses, and inns. Urban centers offered relative freedom from the direct control of feudal lords, allowing merchants to operate more independently. In many cases, towns gained charters that granted them rights of self-government, further fostering an environment conducive to trade. These charters often included legal protections for merchants, privileges such as the right to hold regular markets and fairs, and exemptions from certain taxes or tolls. By the 12th century, these factors collectively created a fertile environment for the growth of the merchant class, setting the stage for their expansion and consolidation of power. Expansion of trade networks and the role of the merchant. The 12th and 13th centuries witnessed a remarkable expansion of trade networks, driven largely by the activities and ambitions of the emerging merchant class. Initially, most trade was local or regional, focused on essential goods such as grains, wool, salt, and wine. Merchants served as intermediaries between rural producers and urban consumers, earning profits by buying in bulk from local farmers and selling at a markup in town markets or fairs. As trade networks matured, regional trade fairs, such as those in Champagne and Flanders, became major events that drew merchants from across Europe. These fairs provided a secure and regulated environment for trade, offering services such as currency exchange, dispute resolution, and even rudimentary forms of insurance for goods in transit. As merchants grew more experienced and confident, they began to venture further afield, engaging in long-distance trade that linked Europe with the Byzantine Empire, Islamic caliphates, India, and China. This expansion was driven by the demand for luxury goods such as silk, spices, gold, and silver, which were highly prized in European markets. Genoese and Venetian merchants were particularly prominent in these trade routes, transporting goods from the Levant to Europe and vice versa. The Silk Road, a complex network of overland and maritime routes connecting Europe and Asia, played a crucial role in facilitating the exchange of not only goods but also ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. European merchants brought back spices, silk, and precious stones, as well as knowledge of advanced techniques in navigation, accounting, and manufacturing that would later prove crucial to European economic development. Northern and Southern Europe were connected through significant trade routes that facilitated the exchange of goods between different regions. For instance, the trade routes linking the Baltic region with the Mediterranean were critical for the movement of goods such as timber, fish, and fur from the north in exchange for wine, oil, and spices from the south. The Hanseatic League, formed in the Baltic and North Sea regions, played a vital role in managing this trade. The League was a powerful commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds and their market towns. Controlling trade in Northern Europe for several centuries, it negotiated trade rights, set standards, and even maintained its own fleet and armed forces to protect its members' interests. The League's influence extended from London to Novgorod, encompassing a vast network of trading cities. In the Mediterranean, Italian city-states like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa emerged as dominant players in maritime trade. These cities, strategically located on important sea routes, built powerful navies to protect their commercial interests and established colonies and trading posts along the coasts of the Black Sea, North Africa, and the Eastern Mediterranean. This network facilitated the flow of goods, information, and capital, further enhancing the wealth and power of the merchant class. Technological innovations, such as the development of the compass and the astrolabe, as well as advances in shipbuilding, including the design of the cog and caravel, made long-distance sea trade more feasible and profitable. These innovations allowed merchants to navigate more accurately and transport larger cargoes, which in turn reduced costs and increased profits. The rise of the merchant class was accompanied by several commercial innovations that revolutionized trade. Merchants developed new financial instruments, such as bills of exchange and letters of credit, which reduced the need to transport large amounts of gold and silver, minimizing the risks associated with theft and loss. Double-entry bookkeeping, an innovation attributed to merchants in the Italian city-states, allowed for more accurate and transparent financial records, making it easier to manage complex transactions. Early forms of insurance emerged to protect merchants against the loss of goods due to shipwrecks, piracy, or theft. Contracts, agreements, and legal documents became more sophisticated, reflecting a growing awareness of risk management in trade. These innovations not only facilitated the expansion of trade but also laid the groundwork for the development of modern financial systems. The Crusades, a series of religious wars initiated by the Latin Church in the medieval period, had a profound impact on trade. While primarily military endeavors, the Crusades opened new markets and trade routes between Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean. Merchants from Italian city-states, such as Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, played a key role in supplying and financing the Crusader armies. They provided transport, supplies, and credit, benefiting significantly from the new commercial opportunities that arose from the Crusades. The Crusades also facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies between the Islamic world and Europe, further stimulating the growth of trade and the influence of the merchant class. For example, Europeans were introduced to advanced Islamic techniques in navigation, shipbuilding, and commerce, which they adapted and utilized to enhance their own trading capabilities. This impact was particularly felt in regions like southern France, where cities such as Marseille flourished due to their roles as gateways for Crusader armies and goods flowing between Europe and the Levant. Urbanization and the rise of merchant power. The expansion of trade networks was closely tied to the growth of urban centers, where merchants increasingly concentrated their activities. As trade flourished, towns and cities across Europe experienced rapid growth, becoming centers of commerce, finance, and culture. Cities like Florence, Ghent, Antwerp, and London grew rapidly, driven by their strategic locations and the burgeoning activities of merchants. Merchants often invested their wealth in urban properties, contributing to city development by funding the construction of public buildings, bridges, and roads, which enhanced their status within the community and created the infrastructure necessary for further economic growth. Merchant guilds emerged as powerful organizations within these cities, regulating trade and protecting the interests of their members. These guilds established rules for trade practices, ensured quality control, and negotiated with local authorities for favorable conditions. In many cities, merchant guilds wielded significant political power, often controlling municipal governments. In London, for example, the guilds effectively governed the city, influencing decisions on taxes, trade regulations, and public policy. In Florence, the Art della Lana, Wool Guild, and other merchant guilds played crucial roles in municipal governance, often at the expense of the traditional aristocracy. In the Iberian Peninsula, merchant guilds in cities such as Barcelona and Seville also gained significant power. These guilds not only regulated local trade but also played a crucial role in financing the Reconquista, the series of campaigns by Christian states to recapture territory from the Moors. In exchange for financial support, these guilds received charters that granted them extensive privileges, including the right to self-governance and exemptions from certain taxes. The influence of merchants in these cities often extended to the royal courts, where they acted as financiers, advisors, and diplomats, further consolidating their power. The desire for autonomy was a defining feature of the urban centers where merchants held sway. Many towns and cities sought charters from their feudal lords or the king, granting them rights to self-governance, tax exemptions, and the ability to hold markets and fairs. These charters often came at a cost, requiring towns to pay substantial sums or regular payments in return. Merchants were instrumental in securing these charters, as they stood to benefit directly from reduced feudal interference and increased local control. In cities like Lübeck, merchants used their economic power to negotiate favorable terms, creating city-states that operated with considerable independence from surrounding feudal territories. The success of these efforts enabled merchants to consolidate their power and influence further, challenging the traditional authority of the feudal nobility and clergy. The rise of the merchant class also brought about significant social changes, particularly in the context of urbanization. Wealthy merchants, many of whom had humble origins, began to rival the nobility in terms of wealth, influence, and power. They built grand houses, funded churches, and commissioned artworks, displaying their status and cultural sophistication. This upward social mobility led to tensions between the merchant class and the old feudal elite, who viewed merchants as upstarts challenging the established order. The resentment was not limited to the nobility. Poorer urban dwellers often harbored grievances against wealthy merchants, whose economic success sometimes came at their expense. This social friction occasionally erupted into conflict, such as the Ciompi Revolt in Florence, 1378, where lower-class workers rose against the merchant elite, demanding greater political representation and economic justice. Similar tensions were observed in cities like Ghent and Bruges, where the growing influence of merchants led to conflicts with local craft guilds and the lower urban classes. The merchant class and the decline of feudalism. The rise of the merchant class was both a symptom and a catalyst of the gradual decline of the feudal system in medieval Europe. The growth of trade and the expansion of the merchant class challenged the traditional economic, social, and political foundations of feudalism. Merchants played a crucial role in shifting Europe's economy from one based primarily on land and agricultural production to one centered around commerce, trade, and a cash-based economy. As merchants thrived, they introduced and popularized the use of currency in everyday transactions, reducing reliance on barter systems. This shift had far-reaching implications for the feudal economy, which was predicated on the exchange of goods and services rather than money. Feudal lords, who traditionally relied on payments in kind, such as grain or labor, from their vassals and serfs, increasingly needed cash to finance wars, maintain armies, and uphold their status. To meet these needs, they often borrowed money from merchants or turned to new economic ventures, further integrating themselves into the cash economy promoted by the merchant class. The political influence of merchants also grew as they became key players in the struggle for power between kings and feudal lords. Merchants often allied themselves with monarchs, who saw them as valuable sources of revenue and as a counterbalance to the power of the nobility. In return for financial support, merchants gained privileges, exemptions from certain taxes, and exclusive trading rights. This alliance weakened the traditional power structures of feudalism, as kings increasingly relied on merchant wealth to maintain their armies and expand their influence. In cities like Bruges, Antwerp, and Florence, merchant elites directly challenged feudal authority by advocating for greater self-governance and autonomy. They used their wealth to influence political decisions, fund municipal militias, and negotiate with external powers. The resulting power shifts diminished the authority of traditional feudal lords, who found their economic and military power eroded by the growing influence of urban centers. The rise of the merchant class also had significant cultural and intellectual consequences. Merchants were often patrons of the arts and education, supporting universities, funding scholars, and promoting the spread of literacy. This patronage contributed to the intellectual revival of the late medieval period, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance. The merchant ethos emphasized values such as individual enterprise, profit, and the accumulation of wealth. These values gradually permeated European society, challenging the traditional feudal ideals of chivalry, honor, and service. The merchant class's emphasis on contracts, legal rights, and private property would eventually influence the development of modern capitalism and the concept of the bourgeoisie. Moreover, the practices and innovations introduced by merchants laid the foundations for early capitalist systems. The use of credit, investment in trade ventures, partnerships, and joint stock companies emerged as merchants sought to minimize risks and maximize profits. These practices reflected a shift towards a more market-driven economy, which contrasted sharply with the agrarian economy of the feudal system. Merchants also played a crucial role in the development of new financial institutions, such as banks and insurance companies, which facilitated the expansion of trade and commerce. For example, the Medici Bank in Florence, founded in the 15th century, was a direct outcome of the increased financial activities generated by merchant ventures. The bank became one of the most powerful financial institutions in Europe, financing trade, political campaigns, and even the papacy. Conclusion: the merchant class as a catalyst of change. The rise of the medieval merchant class marked a significant turning point in European history, fundamentally altering the social, economic, and political landscape. By challenging the established feudal order, promoting new forms of trade and economic organization, and fostering urban growth and political autonomy, the merchant class emerged as a transformative force. They facilitated the transition from a subsistence-based economy to a market-oriented one, laying the groundwork for the emergence of modern capitalism. The impact of the merchant class extended beyond economics. They were key players in cultural and intellectual development that characterized the late medieval period, including the Renaissance. Their emphasis on individualism, enterprise, and wealth accumulation reshaped social norms and values, signaling the end of the medieval world and the beginning of the modern age. The influence of the merchant class persisted beyond the medieval period, shaping the contours of the early modern world. Their emphasis on trade, profit, and economic growth laid the groundwork for the age of exploration, where European powers sought new markets and resources across the globe. Furthermore, the merchant class's challenge to traditional authority can be seen as a precursor to later social and political upheavals, such as the Reformation and the eventual rise of the bourgeoisie as a dominant social and economic force. The merchant class's values of innovation, competition, and economic freedom would later underpin the philosophical underpinnings of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, driving Europe toward modernization and global dominance. Ultimately, the rise of the medieval merchant class exemplifies the complex interplay of economic, social, and political forces that drive historical change. It underscores the importance of economic actors in shaping historical trajectories and reminds us of the dynamic nature of societal transformations. By examining the rise of the merchant class, we gain a deeper understanding of the processes that shaped medieval Europe and set the stage for the modern world. Thanks for listening. Like and comment. And please subscribe, as that will help us get more videos out to those interested in the Middle Ages. See you next time on Medieval Chronicles 1066. Stay curious.